Donald Trump went on Joe Rogan, and it was a very friendly interview, which was the first thing that I noticed, and the first thing that I'm sure anyone who watched noticed, at least if they were wondering how Rogan would treat Trump. For transparency, I watched an hour and a half of the 3-hour interview.
I only watched clips. I wasn't going to sit through 3 hours of that. I just wasn't going to do it, guys. I'm sorry.
Even the hour and a half was hard for me to get through. But what's interesting is Rogan has explicitly said before that he has had multiple chances to have Trump on his podcast and rejected them because he thought Trump was dangerous, that he might be doing a disservice to the country by having him on. So it's interesting that he's now decided that he's kind of changed course on that.
Yeah, it's also important to remember that he was very anti-Trump during Trump's administration. Like with Trump's immigration policy of the separating of the families, he was one of the biggest voices of the internet going off about how if you believe that Trump is doing the right thing on here, you're not a part of the same team as me.
Yes.
Like that was like, we don't even want you on our team anymore.
Totally.
And so him now inviting Trump on, I think it's a measure of Robert Kennedy now endorsing Trump and like joining Trump's forces, because Joe Rogan was a Robert Kennedy supporter prior to him dropping out of the presidential race or suspending his campaign, however he wants to frame it. So I think that played a big role in him becoming more friendly towards Trump.
That makes sense. I mean, the entire manosphere, has aligned towards Trump, and Rogan definitely has at least some kind of role in that. But it was interesting because there was a little bit of a dichotomy that came out only at the very beginning, where Trump was talking about how much media attention he's gotten and how much kind of free media attention he got, and Rogan kind of called him out instantly. He's like, because you said a lot of crazy shit.
Yeah.
Right. But then, and he's like, and that's why they reported on you. He's like, and CNN and all their brilliance decided they were going to put you on TV for every waking moment because you were saying crazy shit. But then Rogan also later on is like, it's so clear that everyone's been conspiring against you, and that like any time that you're on TV, it's crazy what they say. They compare you to Hitler, and that was a clear kind of point of contention for Rogan, is that he's like, I can't believe they're comparing you to Hitler. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Which if you pay attention and you actually listen to what Trump's saying, it is very much not ridiculous.
Yes.
He calls his political enemies vermin. He talks about them as the enemy within, that they need to like cleanse the country, that we have bad genes in our country.
Literally.
Like it's literally Hitler's language. So no, it's not crazy that they're calling him Hitler, but someone who's uninformed like Joe Rogan, it could come across as being crazy that he's being called Hitler.
I suppose it's definitely easy to make it seem like it's crazy, for whether Rogan's uninformed himself or whether he's thinking about an uninformed viewer. Yeah. It's an easy thing to portray. But so that was kind of an interesting, that's like, okay, if he's saying all this crazy shit, then doesn't it kind of make sense that the media is tarnishing him? Like it shouldn't be an unexpected thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That was only a small part, but besides that, they talked about a lot of things. Again, an hour and a half. I won't be able to cover everything. They talked about how windmills are terrible and like they're really bad eyesores, and they don't do a good enough job at generating electricity.
That should be almost disqualifying. Like if a political candidate says something like that's stupid, that's almost disqualifying. Wind power generation is booming across Texas, a Republican state.
Yeah.
It is totally remaking the Texas power grid. It is remaking the Western power grid in this country. And to just say, they're an eyesore, they don't do a good job. What are you talking about?
I will say Rogan said they were an eyesore.
Well, again, which also exemplifies that Rogan's opinion should not be taken on anything political under any circumstance. He's a funny guy. Okay.
Yes.
He has funny comedians on. His stuff with Joey Diaz on that podcast, some of the funniest moments that have ever been recorded in media ever. He's a moron, and you should not take your politics from that guy under any circumstance.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's clear. Well, what's clear?
Well, it may not be clear. Right?
No. Sure. The most obvious thing to me as a viewer is how unequipped, and this is the
very good point you're about to
critique that Rogan, that has been leveraged against Rogan, like anytime he has anyone important on his show, is that he's vastly too uninformed to be the person who's like asking these questions. He can't push back. He doesn't have enough of a basis of the facts or the reality about these kinds of topics to push back. I don't think Joe Rogan is a moron. Like at least in the way of like, I think he can take in information and process it. And and there are things that he knows a lot about and that he is very good at.
If you want to separate moron from ignorant, I would say he was ignorant before being a moron. I think that's fair.
Yeah, sure. Yes. To me, it seemed like he was very ignorant about these things in particular. And that he tried to push Trump as far as like what Trump's stance on nuclear would be, and Trump even tried to push back on nuclear, which was crazy.
I didn't know that.
No, because he pushed back and he was like Fukushima was terrible.
Oh, geez.
Like nuclear is really dangerous. And as Rogan pushes him, he kind of just backs off and doesn't impose his opinion too hard. But
yeah, because Trump's smart. You know, he's not going to do those fights. He's not going to fight on a policy hill.
No, he knows
he's not going to do that.
That Rogan's podcast specifically is not the place.
It's all about the vibes.
Yes,
it's all about the vibes. It's about, oh, wait a second, we can sit across from each other on this like solid wood table with guns in the background and the American flag on the wall, and we could, you know, chit chat about whatever.
Yes,
and that's what it's going for. It wasn't about this type of policy specific stances.
Sure, and he did still talk about policy stuff. He talked about tariffs. I mean, tariffs as well, where he brought up a story of how supposedly a Chinese car factory that was going to be built in Mexico no longer is because he threatened tariffs. He talked about how he was able to appoint 3 amazing Supreme Court justices. Can
we do a fact check on that, the plant in Mexico real quick?
Yeah, so I checked this. Basically, I think there has been a report that BYD, the biggest Chinese EV company, is planning a car plant in Mexico. They haven't like canceled it necessarily. They hadn't started building it yet. I wouldn't be surprised if they are waiting till after the election to start doing it. But they've also claimed that the plan for it is to service the Mexican market,
which we don't believe that.
No.
But the point is, like, the preemptive Trump tariffs are not the reason that this thing isn't built yet. Like, that's not why.
I don't think so.
Right.
At least.
So yeah.
And he at least he certainly can't know so, unless he, I don't know, maybe
no, he can't know so. He can't know so.
Yeah, but again, he tried to do the weave. They talked about the weave thing where Trump like tells stories that are way off topic, and the idea that he kind of brings it back. I think that's such a funny idea because he doesn't bring it back.
No, he never brings it back. And Joe Rogan made a point at one point where he was like, "Okay, your weave's getting pretty big here. Let's bring it back." And Trump's like, "No, wait a minute. The weave. Yes. I'm gonna come back. Just give me a second. Give me one more minute."
No, and he keeps weaving, and then at the end he's like, "No." They were talking about tariffs, and Rogan was asking about tariffs, and he's like, "Yo, you're getting pretty far out. Can we bring it back to tariffs?" And Trump's like, "No, just give me a second. I'll get back." And then he keeps weaving, and he ends like way out here away from tariffs. And then it just kind of cuts off, and he's like, "No, let's get back to tariffs."
Yeah, it's like, it's craziness, dude.
But it's a perfect excuse for him to just say whatever the fuck you want.
Of course, it's a perfect excuse for his early onset dementia. No, I'm kidding. I don't know if he has dementia.
No,
probably does.
I don't think he does.
But point is this. Okay, now I want to move away from this, and I want to get to the meta level here. I want to bring it up. Should Kamala Harris do a Joe Rogan interview? Definitely, right?
Yes.
There's no way. Everything I've said about Joe Rogan, ignorant, not really the point. The point is that politicians nowadays, the American people want a politician that they can think can exist in their living room normally.
Yes.
And chat with me about something.
Totally.
And Joe Rogan and Kamala Harris needs to put that version of herself out there. And the only way she's going to really be able to do it on a big enough scale is to go on the Joe Rogan podcast. Now, the Joe Rogan podcast with Trump already has like 30 million views. Okay, that's 10% of the American electorate, if you say that each view is only one person. Kamala needs to put herself out there with that, which causes concerns because we know that Kamala isn't the most personally relatable person. Yes. She's very disciplined, is what she calls herself. She's very politically disciplined, and I don't know if she would actually be able to, have that good personal connection. But I think she has to try.
She has to try. I mean, because otherwise, the problem right now is the news narrative that Kamala has rejected the opportunity to do it. The most recent thing that we've had is Rogan himself says Kamala wants me to fly out to her and limit the podcast length to an hour to be able to do it. I think that's a bad look for her.
Yeah, but yes, it is a bad look for her, but also the Bernie Sanders Joe Rogan interview was also only an hour, and Bernie put those constraints on there.
Okay.
Yeah, she is still the vice president, so I imagine that she is somewhat busy between campaigning and having the vice presidency of the country. So I imagine there's still things that she has to do. So I don't really blame her for being like, listen, me flying to Austin would actually be really difficult with the campaign schedule that I currently have, and with any responsibilities I have as holding office.
I
get
suppose,
that.
I suppose, especially because we are 1 week away from the election.
So, but despite that, I still think she should do it. Like, despite that, I think you should fly down there and record it at fucking 2 a.m. if you have to.
No, I agree.
Right?
It's
like,
probably the best use of 6 hours or whatever she needs to be that she could
do a rally in Austin too. You know, do another rally with Colin Allred. You know, he's running for Senate down there. Do another rally with him.
Yeah. But I think your point about like having someone that you can talk about it with, I will say like that makes sense. But I will say with Trump in this podcast specifically, I very much get the vibe, yes, that it does feel genuine. It feels like this is just how he would talk if he was talking about something that like him going to jail did not depend on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like
it
doesn't feel like it's super high stakes. But it also, to me, this is just personal, it feels like someone I wouldn't want to hang out with. And so many people, even like liberals and people that I know are going to vote for Kamala, are like, I would, like, he sounds like the type of guy I would want to hang out with, to have a beer with or whatever. But to me, he sounds like the type of person who just kind of talks about himself and talks about himself and talks about himself. And you're kind of sitting there and you're like trapped into listening to him. And like maybe he asks you a question and you say like one sentence for an answer, then he goes back to himself.
And he goes to his weave.
Yes.
You know, he weaves your answer into his larger, you know, whatever amalgamation of whatever stuff he's complaining about that day.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know. I just feel like that would be exhausting.
He's such a complainer.
Yes.
Everything that comes out of his mouth is him the victim.
It's either complaining or bragging.
Yes,
those are the only two modes.
He's a complainer. He's a bragger. He's a loser. I can't stand listening. So, you know, but he might be our next president.